Welcome to our Hangout on Air. Today, it's our Sound for Video session. It is the 7th of June, 2016. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what to bring with you when you're going to do a shoot as a sound guy, and some of the lessons that I learned on a recent project that I did. And let me just go ahead and jump in. We didn't have any questions posted on the Google Plus page today, so we'll go ahead and we'll skip those for now. If you do have those, I encourage you to leave those in the future. Love to be able to discuss any challenges that you're facing and ways that we can make your job a little easier and get better sound. So let's go ahead and jump in. Let me give you some background first of all on adjust things just a touch here. Whoa, that light is searing coming off of this microphone. We had I had an experience this last weekend. A friend of mine invited me to come along, and I guess I should give him a little bit more background first. So mainly, I've been a corporate video shooter for a number of years now, and often operate solo, or in some cases, I'll recruit some of the people around the corporation to help out. They often have people on staff that are happy to and excited to help out. So those have usually been the kind of circumstances where I've done most of my shooting. And one thing I've done is I actually did buy a Sound Devices 633 mixer a little while ago because I was anticipating and planning to do more sound jobs. So actually work for others as the sound mixer. And before I do that, though, before I'm really kind of in a position to really charge for that, one of the things I need to do is kind of go work a few jobs up front and go make whatever mistakes I'm going to make and learn lessons up front. So one of my friends contacted me and said, "Hey, Curtis, do you want to come do sound on this job? We're shooting a short film. It's just a comedy piece, very short." And he didn't tell me a whole lot more about it, so I jumped at the opportunity, and we went ahead and shot that this weekend. So, excuse me. So going into it, I knew very, very little about it. This was all via text message. We didn't even have a chance to talk through the details. When we got to the day before, one thing I did text him and say, "Hey, got to know how many lav mics am I going to need? I'm also planning to bring my boom and do the majority of the capture with a boom mic." And he said, "Oh, you're just going to need 2 lavs. It's a very simple skit." So, and I'm not trying to blame him because he is a great guy. He was actually just acting as the director of photography. So he was going to be operating camera, and I was going to be the sound guy, and it was the third guy who was the director on this no budget short comedy piece. So, and my friend that contacted me to do the job didn't know a whole lot about the piece, knew a little bit, but not everything. So I show up at the first location at the call time, and first lesson learned, I guess, if I can say this. So for me, it was probably about an hour and 15-minute drive to get where I needed to go. And it was a Saturday, so I wasn't too concerned about traffic. I live up in the mountains near Park City, Utah, and the piece was going to be down in the valley. So about an hour drive in any case. So I budgeted about an hour. I left an hour ahead. And based on the Google Maps search and everything, an hour should have been plenty of time. It turns out there was some construction and I got stopped and I was a few minutes late. So first lesson, you may want to budget a little bit more time for yourself when you do have to get to a job. Again, fortunately, this was all pro bono. I wasn't charging for this. And as it turns out, I wasn't the last person there by a long shot. So fortunately, it didn't become a big issue. But that is a lesson learned for me. And I should have known that. I've done, like, for example, as a photographer, I've shot weddings before. You give yourself lots of extra time to get there because you don't want to be the photographer that shows up late. You don't want to be the sound guy that shows up late. So that was my first lesson learned. I did get there and I got a chance to sit down and talk with the director a little bit and have a look at the script. Turns out there were 3 actors, not 2. So having 2 lavalier microphones was not enough. Fortunately, I had made arrangements, so I was fine with the boom pole, and it turns out in the locations that we shot, we should have laved in addition to using the boom, but we didn't. That was another lesson learned I'll talk about a little bit more later. So pre-production is super, super important. And when you're working on these no budget types of pieces, it still makes sense to do some pre-production planning and have a pre-production meeting of some sort where at least the director and the DP and the sound field mixer can meet up and talk through through things, what the locations are, how many actors there are. Ideally, you'll have an opportunity to read the script ahead of time so you'll know. It turns out in this case, this was a really, what's the right term? Things were loose and fast, I guess. And that is they didn't stick to the script exactly. So that's where I said, don't blame my friend. He was the one that said you'll need 2 lavs. It turns out we needed 3 because they kind of threw a third actor in to the mix late in the game, pretty much the day of. And then when I got there and I was talking to the director, originally there were going to be 3 locations: a kitchen in an apartment, sort of a living room in an apartment, and an outdoor location that was going to be at like a local softball diamond, and they'd be sitting in the bleachers talking. So apologies for that. So that was the original plan, but the final plan changed and it just sort of evolved on the spot. And this is, again, a case where these types of productions are a serious, serious challenge. And I think a really good experience as you're learning sound, because you will have to think on your feet and solve problems very, very quickly. So the second location ended up being in a public restroom, believe it or not. Now, fortunately, we had the restroom blocked off, so we weren't going to have to run into any issues with people actually trying to come in and use the restroom. But recording in a restroom is incredibly difficult because the sound is just kind of the nature of the sound in those types of environments is usually pretty awful. There's tons and tons of reverb, the hardest surfaces you can imagine, nothing soft in there to absorb any of the sound. And so the reverb was pretty atrocious. So I'll get to that in a few minutes here. So we the first shoot again was in the sort of the kitchen and dining room area of a small apartment. And so what I decided to do there was saw the location. Fortunately, I had kind of built a little bit of rapport with the director up front. And so I asked for a few things just to make sure that he got the best possible final result. And actually, let me also, again, one other thing I forgot to tell you, taking a step back, this short piece had actually been shot 2 other times before. They had already shot in full this entire skit 2 times prior to this, and he wasn't satisfied with the results. And in both of those previous cases, he had shot with just a little camera top shotgun microphone. So we knew that we would be able to get better sound than he had gotten on those previous 2 shoots. Pretty confident of that, as long as I didn't mess anything up. So anyway, so we started in that kitchen and dining room. The camera was kind of set up in the kitchen, looking across a countertop out to kind of a countertop bar. The 2 main actors were sitting at the bar, and then there was a third actor sitting at the kitchen table behind them. And so we got kind of things arranged in terms of where I was going to stand in relation to the camera. One thing, again, a lesson learned these are kind of a lot of obvious things. So I apologize if you're kind of scratching your head going, duh, these are easy. Why would you not know this? But just some practical things to consider. I was going to be hand booming boom microphone, in this case indoors, my Audio-Technica AT4053B, which is a hypercardioid pickup pattern mic. So we got my location. I am very tall. I'm 6'7". I'm not sure what that translates to in terms of centimeters, but I'm extraordinarily tall. So fortunately, I don't typically need an Apple box or any sort of crate to stand on, generally. But I think that is something I will add to my kit because it will make it a little easier. Because when you're booming and you've got your arms up the entire time for an entire take, that's incredibly tiring. And just being able to bring the boom pole down like this can put you in a position where you'll have the stamina to go a lot longer for a take. So I think I still will invest in an Apple box, something I can stand on, that will make this a lot easier in those cases. So that's a lesson to consider as well. We went ahead and shot the first one and the first scene in that kitchen and dining room, and that went actually very, very well. I think, again, things were loose and fast, and the director was at first not even using the clapper board, and we kind of, the DP had brought that, and we kind of nudged him a little bit, said, hey, we should actually be slating this. So he started slating after a few takes, which was good. He also wasn't calling out everything. It just the DP was actually calling out camera rolling. And so I started calling out sound rolling as well. Typically the director will say roll sound, wait for the sound mixer to say sound rolling, then call out roll camera. And then the camera operator will yell out either camera rolling or count camera speed. And then the director will call action. So again, some lessons learned, I think, for this director who is new at the job. But it was a really good experience, I think, for all of us in learning there. So you may have to gently and kindly nudge your director to say, hey, could we call things out properly, just so we make sure that we don't miss anything and actually do a take without sound accidentally, or whatever may happen. And those things can happen all the time. Slating is really helpful too. It's going to make his job, he's also going to be the editor. The director will be the editor. It's going to make his job a whole lot easier in post. Let me adjust this microphone here real quick. That's going to make his job a whole lot easier in post if he's got a slate that actually calls out the scene and the take numbers. He'll be able to find the audio and sync it up to the camera picture a lot easier as a result of having used that slate. So a good thing there. Before we actually started shooting in this location, I noticed a few things really quickly. I walked around the kitchen a little bit, clapping my hands, just seeing how the room reacts to sound. And of course, as almost all kitchens are, it was very reverberant. So I'd actually brought some sound blankets. We threw those down on the floor. I asked if we could do that. Threw those down on the floor. He had some extras lying around. So we were able to throw down some more of those. And that actually did a lot towards mellowing out the room and mellowing out some of the reverb. And we just put them on the floor. We didn't actually hang them on the wall or anything like that. So even just putting them on a hard surfaced floor can make a big, big difference in terms of how the sound reacts with the room and how much reverberation you'll get. So that's another thing to consider. And we did that. We threw those down, again, between the countertop bar where the two main actors were sitting and all the way around the table, at least three sides of the table. So that was helpful there. Another thing I noticed, the air conditioner was running. It was a hot summer day. And I asked if we could turn off the air conditioner once we started shooting. And I was very grateful. He was amenable to do that. So we did that. So that helped a lot. Also, there was a refrigerator in the room, and the refrigerator, of course, was running, and asked if we could unplug that as well. And he was accommodating and did that as well. So between turning off the air conditioner, turning off the refrigerator, and putting sound blankets on the floor, I'm confident that we got pretty decent sound on that particular scene. And again, I was just booming. I didn't even have lav mics on the actors. We didn't have the benefit of any makeup people or wardrobe people there, so we would have been on our own. And I'm actually, in the future, I will definitely lav them as well. Again, we didn't lav mainly because I didn't have enough lavalier microphones for all three of the actors. So in retrospect, I should have laved the two main actors anyway, just again, for safety and for good measure. So I have to learn to be a little bit more, I had the foresight to talk to the director and get the air conditioner turned off and get the refrigerator turned off, but I didn't, in light of the fact that things were moving pretty quickly, I should have been a little bit more forward and said, hey, I need to lav up these two guys as well. So lesson learned there. So that was the first scene. That went pretty well. Initially, again, the plan was that the first scene would be there in the kitchen and the dining room. Second scene would be at the ballpark in the bleachers, outdoor location. And then the third scene would be back in the apartment in the front room, sort of the living room area that was carpeted. That changed that very same day. He decided, you know what, I don't want to use this location. I don't like how it looks. I want to instead, and this is where they were kind of modifying the whole story and script real time, which that's, to be honest, I think that's a little bit sort of it's a dangerous thing to do. I think a lot of starting filmmakers do stuff like that a little bit more often. Bigger productions, obviously, when there are bigger budgets and they've already done all the pre-production planning, they'll be much less likely to do that. So anyway, fortunately, we were small enough and light enough that we could make that change. And this is where we went to the public restroom. So the guy that wrote the story, who was another guy, actually also had access to a public high school. Whoops, we have a little bit of sound going on there. 1 second here. Hi, Pedro. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Just for a while.
No worries. All right. So, so what we did in that particular case is he had access to this public high school, and we went to a restroom in that high school, and that's where they wanted to shoot the second scene. So, as you might imagine, again, high school, all tile floors, tile up most of the wall. And in fact, in this particular bathroom, I think the tile went all the way to the ceiling. So lots and lots of sound bouncing off the walls and reflecting back, lots of reverb. It was a very tight space, so we had 3 actors in there, plus we had the director, the cameraman. We had a 3rd production assistant in there. We also had the story writer happened to be there as well. So this was an interesting location for me because I'd never shot in a location quite like this with that much reverb. So one of the things that we did is I asked if we could bring in sound blankets, and we actually hung them on some light stands. So we actually had the actors were up, they were at the, and again, I this particular piece is a pretty odd one. The actors were actually at the urinals in the men's restroom. And so they were facing the urinals and they were turning their heads to the side to say their lines. The camera was shooting them from behind. And then I was standing pretty much next to the camera, booming out above them as best I could. So I actually had the boom on the microphone would reach over their heads and point back towards their mouths a little bit. So I had to adjust the angle of the microphone on the boom. And so we set up that one sound blanket on stands, which they were very kind to accommodate on that. And then I actually invited all those guys to get in the room as much as possible. Here's another thing too, that people are largely consist of water, and that will do that will help some to mellow out reverberation in particularly reverberant rooms. So if you're in a situation like that and you don't have a lot of blankets to work with in terms of mellowing out the sound, bringing people into the room can also help that a little bit. Of course, keeping them, out of the frame and, against the walls as much as possible to kind of help absorb some of that sound. So that's one thing we did there. The sound will still be very reverberant. In post, it'll be my job to clean that up as much as possible. And that's when I'll be pulling out iZotope RX to help mellow out some of that reverb. So that was a story. That's how they wanted to shoot it. So we did our best to accommodate. Again, in that case, I had not laved the actors again because I had 2 instead of 3 because of that change earlier in the day. I should have probably laved the 2 main actors again, but lesson learned there for me. So I'm not sure how that would have reacted. My experience is that I was using, again, my hypercardioid mic in that room. I think it would have been, I don't know that the lavs would have done better at rejecting any of the reverberation in my experience so far. So I don't know that that would have been a big win there, but it would have been good for safety. That was one case. That was a tricky room also from the standpoint that the way they had the scene framed, there was very little room to get my boom up over the actors because the ceiling was right there. And there was one take we had to redo because the boom actually did drift down into the scene a little bit. So we had to stop. We put some tape up on the wall to kind of reinforce my line. You always have to ask and work with the camera operator to get your line, the line above which you need to stay so that your boom mic doesn't come down into the frame. So that was my one transgression, if you will, during the day for that shoot. So we got that taken care of and finalized that scene. So that scene is going to take a fair bit of post-processing work to get that cleaned up and sounding where we need it to sound. Now, we're not obviously going to remove all the reverb. We still, it's the location. So the location still needs to sound like the location. We just need to make it so it's not so distracting that it pulls people out of the story. So I'll have some work to do there. Our third location was outdoors at a softball park, and the actors were sitting up on some bleachers. It was late in the day, so the sun was low in the sky, and we lit we lit the actors with the natural light there. They set up a large scrim between the sun and the actors, and that made it tricky because now as soon as you put a boom pole up with the light source directly behind it, you're going to get a shadow, and you didn't want that shadow to be in the shot. So we had to kind of work through that. So what that meant is I ended up having to walk up onto the bleachers parallel to the actors and boom up above them as high as I could so that the shadow of the microphone wouldn't show. And you're just going to have to experiment in those circumstances to see where the shadow's falling and find a way to manage that. So the other things we could have done, a lot of times on the larger production films, they will actually have the gaffers, those that are responsible for the lighting design, actually put up flags so that you can flag off the boom microphone, so that when you're holding the boom microphone up behind the flag sits between the lights and the boom microphone. It'll be the flag that's actually blocking the light and preventing the shadow in the first place. And oftentimes, if you watch closely in movies, you'll notice that there are dark areas on the wall. And usually that's because they flagged off the light so that you could get a boom mic in there. Just kind of a curiosity thing for you. So so that's how we had to shoot that third scene. In that case, I'd moved to a shotgun microphone. Obviously, since we were working outdoors, I had a Rode Blimp cover over the shotgun microphone, and the furry cover on top of that. We did have a little bit of a breeze, and that did really, really well. From that standpoint, the challenge with miking that particular situation was that I had to hold that mic up pretty high to keep it from casting a shadow on the backdrop. And I'm concerned that we got a little bit farther away from the actors than I would normally like to get. So there will be a little bit more ambiance. So I'll probably have a little bit more post work to do on that one as well. And that would have been a good situation. They were sitting right next to each other where I should have lobbed them up as well. Again, lesson learned there. So just kind of taking it a step at a time here, and had my hands full with the booming job. But I need to kind of get myself together so I can get in there and actually also do the lav work as well. So one of the things that happened that day as well, and here's part of the reason I didn't lav up as well, a serious mistake. In my haste to get packed up and take the stuff out, the one thing I forgot to bring with me was I have a little kit that includes all the things that I typically use to mount a lavalier microphone, to hide it and to keep it from rubbing against clothes or clothes rubbing against it and make it sound good. So that's another big part of the reason that I didn't use the lav mics that day. Left that kit at home, and that is a very rookie mistake, to be honest. And so let me just show you here. And I've done this with my photography jobs in the past, and I henceforth will be doing that with the sound jobs as well. And let me just show you here. I put together a little checklist that I will be using from now on to make sure that I get everything. I don't leave anything that's critical behind. And so here, just in Google Docs, I put together a list of all the things that I will need for each sound job. And I kind of broke it down in a variety of ways. So obviously, if you're doing different types of jobs, whether it's indoor, outdoor, or maybe all jobs, I wanted to list each line item, kind of marking it as, okay, this is something I need all the time. This is something I only need if I'm doing an indoor job. And this is something I only need if I'm doing an outdoor job. And then I listed what gear that is. And of course, we'll run through that in just a minute. How many of them I think I'll generally need. Of course, that's going to change from job to job. And then also if there's any sort of preparation that needs to take place ahead of time. So for example, with batteries, you need to get those charged up if you're using rechargeables. If you're using any sort of expendables like AA batteries, if you need to have even more AA batteries than you have rechargeables, you're probably going to need to buy some of those. And then also for example, my lavalier mounting kit, there are some expendables in there. So things that you would only use one time that you may need to buy more of for each additional job. So those are going to be things like Rycote makes those undercovers, which are little things that mount lavalier microphones underneath someone's clothing. Need to buy some of those every once in a while. Tape, you'll need to buy new tape every once in a while. That's another thing that is not necessarily part of my lavalier mounting kit, but I need to add here, of course, and that is gaffer tape. So, and this is a living, I recommend you do it in a spreadsheet or something like that so you can add to the list and kind of keep a master list somewhere. So let's sort of run through all of the things that I have put on this list here just quickly. Obviously, you need your field mixer or recorder. In my case, that was the Sound Devices 633. And of course, I needed to make sure that I had the batteries all ready and charged. Now, the batteries, the 633 uses the Sony NP-F style of batteries. These are the style of batteries you'll see for lots of kind of smaller LED lights. They're used for powering monitors, cameras, all sorts of different things. But those are kind of the primary source. And so the 633 can actually take 2 of those. You mount 2 of those on the back. And that'll usually get you through a full production day. So I had 2 of those, and I had those ready to go. But then in addition to that, I also have this external battery for my recorder, which is a bigger Anton Bauer battery. This is a big one. This one will actually last about, I can power the Sound Devices 633 for about, I think it's about 20 hours on a full charge. So that's sort of a real safety net there for me. I don't like to carry that around in the bag if I don't have to, but I did have it with me in case I did need it. Also, when you're doing a pro job, you probably want to have some sort of backup on hand if you can. Now, when you're starting out, you probably can't afford that, but I do have some backups. So my Zoom F8 here filled the role as a backup. I think something like a Tascam DR60D or 70D would be a fine choice for a backup as well. And then, of course, in that case, it's powered by AA batteries, so I needed to have the AA batteries all charged up and ready to go. To hook this external battery up, these are the kind of little things that's easy to forget. So that's why I like to have a checklist like this. So there's a cable that connects the external battery to the recorders, and I needed to make sure I packed that, and I did. Obviously, you're going to need some XLR cables for any of your boom mics, or if you're going to be using handheld mics, whatever it may be, you can decide how many you need. But I like to bring 3 of them there. That way, if one of them fails, you have a second one at least to fall back to. And believe it or not, when you get out in the field, it is very possible for XLR cables to fail. And in fact, one of my cables, I noticed just recently that on the male connector, there's a sort of a metal ring around it, and there's a little slot for it to connect, kind of lock onto the device that you're connecting it to. That little piece of metal that crosses that slot actually broke off, and I have no idea how that happened. And I'm very, very careful with my cables. But cables are things that you will have to replace over time if you do sound pretty often and fairly seriously. Now, for any of the indoor jobs, I'm definitely going to need a cardioid microphone. In this case, I'm using my Hypercardioid Audio-Technica 4053B. And then, of course, for the outdoor shoots, a shotgun microphone is what you'll have up on the boom. And in this case, I was using the Rode NTG4 Plus. Wireless lavalier microphones. So of course you need the wireless kits, plus you need the lavalier microphones. And in this case, I actually had 3 lavalier microphones. I had my 2 Rode lavaliers plus a Sanken COS11D, but I only had 2 wireless kits. So that was, again, don't need to beat that horse to death, but that was part of the reason I didn't end up wiring them up. But wireless kits, I'm probably going to need to invest in a few more of those. I think having 3 actors is not uncommon when you're doing narrative work. So I'd probably need to add at least 1 more of those to my kit. And I haven't kind of landed on which ones I'm going to use long-term. Right now I have 2 Rode Links, and those are okay in situations where you're not getting a lot of interference necessarily. But I get nervous about those a little bit. So I haven't decided finally what I'm going to land on in the long run. Also, you need some adapters from time to time. So for example, to get those Rode Links hooked up to my Sound Devices, I need a 3.5mm to XLR adapter. So those are the kind of things you also want to have on your list. Batteries for the wireless kit. In this case, this is where I would probably buy just some AA's from the store just to have the extras on hand. And you can burn through these pretty quickly. So keep in mind that those wireless lavs are going to be on the whole time, even between takes. So they could be on for the entire day. So you're going to have to refresh those throughout the day. The Rode Link will last about 4 hours. And so typically it's my experience. So after about 3 hours, you're going to want to start getting those batteries refreshed and swapped out. Lavalier mounting kit. This was the big thing that I missed. Obviously, you want to make sure you bring your boom pole. It's very easy to leave one thing behind when you have to bring all this stuff. I like to bring at least 1 Sentry stand with the boom holder on it. So if I'm doing if there's a longer scene where the actor is not going to be moving around a lot, but maybe monologuing or even dialogue, between two people. Having a couple of Sentry stands with these boom holders makes it a lot easier. You can actually put those mics up on the stands and not have to worry about it. And that reminds me too, I would also bring I have these saddle style sandbags. I think most of you have seen those before. And you could put that on the base of the Sentry stand to keep it from getting over. And also, if you're going to be booming a fairly significant distance out, you'll also want to put a sandbag up on the back end of the boom pole to sort of steady and sort of counterweight that boom that's sticking way out. So that even just on our call here today, I've added 2 additional items, and I'm sure I'll be adding more over time. Right, so we've run out of time for today. We've covered everything that I was hoping to cover. So again, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Go ahead and leave those down below. Love to hear what your questions may be on those items. And thanks for joining today's session. Yeah, I think that's it for today. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.